Tonight, you travel quietly back in time, not to witness great events, not to stand in crowded forums or echoing marble halls, not to meet emperors or soldiers whose names would be remembered, but simply to walk without purpose to an ordinary night in ancient Rome, where the warmth of the day has finally slipped from the stone roads, and the air moving between the buildings has become gentle and cool. And if you find comfort in wandering through places like this, you can subscribe and return whenever you like. But for now, there is nothing to follow, nowhere to be, and nothing required of you, except to let this calm journey carry you softly toward rest, as you step onto a narrow street paved with worn stones that still remember thousands of footsteps from earlier in the day. You arrive without sound, and ahead of you a man pulls his wooden door closed with a slow and tired motion, pausing for a moment with his hand resting on the latch as he looks up at the thin ribbon of night sky caught between the rooftops. While across from him, a woman leans out from a doorway to shake crumbs from a cloth into the gutter, brushing her hands together before stepping back behind a hanging curtain, where warm lamplight glows and settles gently against the wall like a quiet presence that asks nothing of the night. You walk past them unnoticed, your steps blending into the faint echoes drifting between the walls, where distant voices murmur from upper windows as families finish their evening meals by oil lamp. And somewhere further along the street, you hear the careful stacking of clay bowls for tomorrow's market, each one placed gently inside another in a rhythm that is patient and unhurried, like the city itself slowly exhaling after a long day that has now come to rest, while faint scents of cooked grains and cooling bread linger in the air and drift quietly into the open street before dissolving into the calm darkness. As you continue walking, you notice a narrow alley where light spills softly onto the stones, and inside a small room, someone folds garments with slow, repeated movements, preparing them neatly for morning, while above this doorway a shutter opens briefly and a hand reaches out to shake dust from a blanket, before pulling it back inside, where low laughter can be heard for only a moment before the sound disappears again, leaving the street just as still as before. Further along, a hanging lamp sways slightly in a gentle breeze, and its golden glow moves slowly across the wall like water, and beneath it a pair of sandals rests beside a doorway where their owner has already gone to sleep, trusting that the quiet night will pass without disturbance. While from somewhere deeper in the district, you hear the soft scrape of wood against stone as a stool is moved across a floor before settling into place. And then even that sound fades away into the hush that now blankets the entire street. You walk without hurry, without purpose, and without needing to be anywhere at all, simply observing the small and ordinary moments of a city finishing its day, where no one notices your presence and nothing asks for your attention. And with every step, the world around you grows softer, calmer, and more distant from the concerns you brought with you from your own time. As the ancient night slowly wraps itself around your thoughts and begins to guide them toward rest, ahead of you the street curves gently, and you follow it without thinking, passing doorways where curtains hang still, and windows where faint light glows behind thin fabric, suggesting lives that continue quietly behind walls you cannot see through. And in one such room you glimpse the shadow of a person moving slowly as they extinguish a lamp and prepare a place to sleep, their movements unhurried and practiced in the way of someone who has repeated the same small rituals at the end of many days, while outside the night air cools the stones beneath your feet and carries with it the distant scent of oil, clay, and cooling brick that seems to belong only to places like this. Somewhere behind you a latch settles into place with a soft wooden click, and ahead of you a loose shutter taps gently against a frame in the breeze, creating a slow and patient rhythm that blends with the silence rather than disturbing it. And as you walk, you begin to notice how the city is not empty at all, but filled with quiet life that has simply turned inward, retreating behind doors and curtains where people now rest from their work and allow the night to harry them towards sleep, just as this gentle walk is carrying you there now. Further along the street, you pass beneath a hanging oil lamp that sways gently in a soft breeze, and its golden light stretches across the wall and spills down onto the stones like warm water, where it rests quietly without disturbing the darkness that surrounds it. And just beyond this glow, a small bakery stands with its door open only a hand's width, allowing the last of the warm air from inside to drift slowly outward into the night. Inside, a young apprentice brushes flour from a wooden table with slow and careful strokes, preparing the surface for morning, while his master sits nearby on a low stool, rubbing tired hands together and watching the street without really seeing it, as though his thoughts have already begun to settle into the rest that waits for him behind a curtain at the back of the room. The scent of bread and grain lingers in the cool air as you continue walking, and above you, a wooden shutter opens briefly as someone leans out to shake dust from a blanket, letting it fall like pale mist before pulling the cloth back inside, where a faint laugh can be heard for only a moment before the window closes again and the sound disappears into the stillness. You move on slowly, noticing how the stones beneath your feet hold the memory of the day's warmth, and how the night air slips between buildings in gentle currents that seem to carry away the last traces of movement and sound, leaving only the quiet presence of homes where people now rest behind curtains and doors that have been carefully closed against the dark. 2 night watchmen appear ahead of you, walking at an unhurried pace, their sandals scuffing lightly against the road as they speak in low voices about simple things that do not matter, sharing the calm hours together while the rest of the city drifts deeper into sleep. And as they pass you, they nod to one another without noticing your presence before continuing on into another street, where their voices fade away. After they are gone, the silence returns even more fully than before, broken only by the faint crackle of an oil lamp somewhere behind a wall, and the occasional creak of cooling wood as beams settle into the night air. And with every step, you feel the world growing softer around you, as though Rome itself is folding inward and allowing the darkness to gently cover it like a blanket laid across a bed. You walk without hurry and without needing to arrive anywhere at all, simply allowing the slow rhythm of this place to guide your thoughts away from the present and into the quiet simplicity of this ancient night, where nothing asks for your attention and nothing pulls you away from the calm that is beginning to settle comfortably around you. Ahead, the street bends slightly, and you follow it without thinking, passing doorways where sandals have been left neatly beside thresholds, and windows where thin fabric hangs unmoving in the still air, suggesting rooms where people have already lowered themselves onto woven mats and allowed sleep to take them gently, while faint traces of oil, clay, and cooling brick drift through the night and seem to belong only to places that have lived through many centuries of quiet evenings like this one. Somewhere behind you, a latch settles into place with a soft wooden click, and ahead of you, a linse shutter taps gently against its frame in the breeze, creating a slow rhythm that blends into the silence rather than disturbing it. And as you continue walking, you notice how the city is not empty at all, but filled with life that is simply turned inward, retreating behind doors and curtains where the day's efforts have ended and rest has begun. You pass a small alcove where a clay lamp has been placed carefully on a ledge to light the entrance for anyone returning late, and its small flame moves gently in the air, casting shadows that stretch and contract along the wall like slow breathing, while from within the room behind it comes the faint sound of someone shifting on a mat before settling again into stillness. Further on, you hear the distant splash of water being poured from a jug into a basin, followed by the soft scrape of pottery being set down on stone. Small sounds that drift briefly into the street before dissolving into the night, leaving the world as quiet as it was before they appeared. You continue without hurry, noticing how the lamps now seem farther apart and how the darkness between them feels softer rather than deeper, as though the entire district has settled into a shared rest. And with each step, the quiet becomes more complete, guiding your thoughts gently away from the present and deeper into the calm rhythm of this ancient night. You enter a broader road where the buildings rise taller and closer together, their upper floors dark now, except for a few soft windows where amber light glows through thin curtains, suggesting rooms where people are finishing the last small movements of their day before allowing themselves to rest. And as you walk, You notice how the sound of your steps seems to settle quickly into the air, as though the night itself is gently absorbing anything that might disturb its calm. Inside one such window, an old man sits beside a small flame, slowly rolling a scroll into a clay tube and setting it aside with careful hands, preparing his thoughts to rest just as his body is ready to do the same. While across the street, behind a woven curtain, a mother lowers a sleeping child onto a mat and brushes loose hair from the child's forehead before leaning forward to blow out the lamp. Leaving only moonlight to rest quietly across the room, you continue forward without sound, noticing how the street seems to narrow again and how the darkness between the lamps feels softer rather than deeper, as though it carries comfort rather than emptiness. And from behind one closed door comes the faint scrape of a chair being moved before settling into place, a small and ordinary sound that drifts briefly into the street before fading away. Above you, a shutter shifts gently in the breeze, tapping once against its frame before growing still. And from somewhere farther away you hear a quiet cough, followed by silence, reminders that life continues quietly behind every wall, even as most of the city has now surrendered itself to sleep. You pass a doorway where a pair of sandals has been placed neatly side by side, their owner already resting inside, trusting that the night will pass without interruption. And beside them, a small clay lamp sits on a ledge with its flame turned low, casting shadows that stretch and contract along the wall like slow breathing, while the air carries faint scents of oil, cloth, and cooling brick that seem to belong only to evenings such as this. Further along, you notice a small alcove where someone has left a bowl and cup ready for morning, placed carefully on a stone shelf as though tomorrow has already been quietly prepared in advance. And from within the room behind it comes the soft sound of someone turning on a mat before settling once more into stillness that feels complete and undisturbed. The road bends slightly and you follow it without thinking, passing walls where faint light glows through fabric and suggests lives that have simply turned inward for the night. And in one such room, you glimpse the shadow of a person moving slowly as they fold a garment and lay it neatly beside their bed, repeating motions that have ended countless days before this one. You begin to notice how your own thoughts are growing slower with each step, as though the rhythm of this place is gently guiding them away from the present and into the quiet simplicity of this ancient night, where nothing asks for your attention and nothing requires your response, and the only thing left to do is to continue walking through the calm that surrounds you. From somewhere deeper within the district, you hear the distant sound of water being poured into a basin, followed by the soft scrape of pottery against stone, small sounds that drift into the street and dissolve just as quickly, leaving behind a silence that feels fuller rather than emptier, as though the city is wrapped carefully in layers of rest. A loose piece of fabric hanging from a window stirs in the breeze and then settles again, and beneath it, a wooden beam gives a gentle creak as it cools, sounds that belong entirely to the night and seem to exist only to remind you how still everything has become. You continue without hurry, without purpose, and without needing to be anywhere at all, simply observing how the city has folded into itself, allowing the darkness to cover it like a blanket laid gently across a bed, while the moonlight rests quietly on the stones and the air moves softly between the buildings without asking anything in return. Ahead of you, the street opens slightly, and you pass beneath another lamp whose flame has burned low, its light barely reaching the stones below. And you notice how even this small glow feels sufficient in a night that asks for so little, while from a nearby window comes the faint sound of someone drawing a curtain closed before retreating into the quiet beyond it. With each step, the world grows softer and more distant, and the simple act of walking through this place becomes the only thing that matters, as though the ancient night itself is gently guiding you toward the rest that waits at the end of this calm and unhurried journey. As you move toward the quieter edge of the district, the street widens slightly and the lamps grow fewer, leaving longer stretches of soft darkness between each pool of light. And you begin to notice how the night here feels deeper, but not heavier, as though the entire city has now settled into a shared and undisturbed rest that asks nothing from anyone who passes through it. Ahead of you, a small fountain stands where water flows in a steady and patient stream into a shallow basin. And beside it, a lone guard rests on a stone bench with his spear leaning against the wall. His eyes half closed as he listens to the water and allows the cool air to drift across his thoughts without effort or resistance. You pass him quietly, and he does not stir, trusting the calm of the night and the stillness of the streets, while the sound of water continues behind you in a gentle rhythm that follows you for several steps before fading into the distance like a memory that does not need to be held onto. Beyond this point, doors are firmly closed and shutters drawn tight, and you notice how the walls themselves seem to absorb the faint light of the moon, reflecting it back onto the stones in pale tones that make the road ahead easy to follow without requiring any attention at all. You continue walking without hurry, noticing how the air has grown cooler and how each step feels lighter than the last, as though the concerns you brought with you from your own time have slowly fallen away with every quiet scene you have passed, leaving only the simple act of moving forward through this peaceful and ancient night. From somewhere behind a wall comes the faint sound of someone turning on a mat before settling again into stillness. And from another building, you hear the soft scrape of pottery being set down carefully for morning. Small and ordinary sounds that drift briefly into the street before dissolving into silence once more. A loose shutter taps once against its frame in the breeze and then grows still, and nearby a clay lamp has been left burning low in an alcove to guide anyone returning late, its flame barely moving as it casts long and gentle shadows that stretch along the wall like slow breathing in the dark. You pass beneath it without thinking, and notice how even this tiny glow feels sufficient in a night that asks for so little, where nothing competes for your attention and nothing disturbs the calm that has settled completely over the city. Further along, the road curves gently and you follow it as though you have walked this way many times before, passing doorways where sandals have been left neatly beside thresholds, and windows where thin curtains hang unmoving in the still air, suggesting rooms where people now rest without worry, trusting that the quiet night will pass peacefully above them. You begin to notice how the moonlight rests differently here, spreading softly across the stones and walls without casting sharp shadows, and how the absence of sound feels complete rather than empty, as though the entire district has folded inward and wrapped itself carefully in layers of rest. From somewhere in the distance comes the faintest echo of footsteps, perhaps another guard making his rounds in a far street. But the sound is so soft and so far away that it never quite reaches you before fading again into the hush that surrounds everything. You continue walking without purpose, without destination, and without needing to arrive anywhere at all, simply allowing the rhythm of this place to guide your thoughts gently away from the present and deeper into the calm simplicity of this ancient Roman night. As you approach the outer road, you pause for a moment and look back over the path you have taken, realizing that you have not walked through great history tonight, but through the quiet and ordinary rhythm of lives finishing their day, where doors were closed, lamps were dimmed, and people prepared themselves for sleep in ways that have changed very little across centuries. A soft breeze moves across the rooftops and slips between the buildings, brushing gently past you before continuing on its way, carrying with it the faint scent of oil, stone, and night air that seems to belong only to places like this. There is nothing more to observe now, nowhere else to walk, and nothing left to notice except how the calm of this place has settled comfortably around you, and how the simple act of moving slowly through it has guided your thoughts toward a quiet rest that no longer feels distant. You stand for a moment longer in the pale moonlight, allowing the stillness to remain exactly as it is, before turning gently away from the streets of ancient Rome and letting the night carry you the rest of the way into sleep.